Hey teachers! Eu sou a professora Valquíria, aqui do canal For Teachers. Esse é o quadro Coffee Time, Trajetos de quem hoje ensina. No episódio de hoje, nós recebemos o professor doutor Lucas Chagas, efetivo da Universidade Estadual do Mato Grosso do Sul. Ele vai contar um pouquinho pra gente hoje como foi a trajetória dele aprendendo a língua inglesa e quais foram as principais dificuldades.
So, learning English for me, it was a great thing. But I should confess and I should swear that it was not something so easy. I remember that I started to study the language officially when I was 10. Before it, I had some contact with the language when I got in touch with some relatives that lived abroad. But when I started my process of studying it in a language school, it was so hard for me in the beginning. I remember until today that it didn't make any sense, the connection between the words and also the connection between the vowels and the consonants and the differences of the sounds that English had with Portuguese. It was not so easy to understand it, but I remember that I studied in a language school in Patrocínio, Minas Gerais, which was so concerned with the learning, and I had great teachers in that time that offered me extra classes, and on these extra classes I used it to take a long time repeating the words and memorizing the words and also copying 3 times each word. So it was very hard for me because I used to go to school and I was very tired and I used to leave the school, pass in the language school and study for 2 or 3 hours sometimes and then return home. During the first 6 months, it was very difficult for me to understand the language, the structures of the language. But my mother said for me that I couldn't give up and that English on that time, it was essential if I could or if I wanted to be a great professional in the future. So in the second semester, I met a great language teacher. Her name was Zaza, and she was very old and she was a retired teacher, and as a retired teacher she had all the abilities of teaching the language, and I don't know how magical were her classes or was her classes that I got in touch with the language. And after that, I had a progressive learning and I became a very good student. So, some years later, I decided to study languages at the university and as a college. And I actually didn't know exactly what kind of college would I choose. And the teachers I had from this language school said for me, why don't you try the language course at the university? So I was determined by their wishes and I started to study and I fell in love with linguistics, and also I kept on studying English at the university, but it was a completely different language, because English in the university was connected to different speaking genres and different speaking styles, and also different skills that I didn't have enough when I was studying in the language school. So some months later I decided to transfer my college to a huge university, and I remembered until today that my first class in the university, that was an English class, and we were studying phonetics and phonology of the English language. And I had a very great and fantastic teacher, actually professor. And this professor was just incredible, but he had a very British accent, and it was very hard for me to understand what he was talking about. But that accent, it was so beautiful on that time that I couldn't think about not learning it. And I was just amazed by the opportunity of getting in touch with this other accent. And studying with him, it was a great chance for me to know some language variants, and also the better pronunciation or the right pronunciation of some words, some expressions, and some differences between, for example, American and British English. And also I got in touch with English as a lingua franca. And I spent the next years at university studying so deeply the language. And I had the impression that with each text I used to read, I didn't know anything about the language. So when I concluded the college, I had a great chance to spend a year in international mobility in the University of Lorraine in France, in which I had the chance to study some courses of English civilization, and also courses concerning to neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics, and grammar of the English language. And it was just shocking for me because the European approach of languages was so different from what I was used on my time. And I had the impression that I didn't know anything about the language again. So I started to get in touch with another language, and this was real English as a lingua franca. So in the University of Lorraine, I had friends from all the world, from Arabia to Korea, from United States, from England, from Africa, from Colombia, and well, I used English to communicate with them. And it was a great opportunity to widen my knowledge in the language, but also a great opportunity to see that there are so many different ways of saying a word or pronouncing a word, or even telling some expressions. And I got in touch with a fantastic ability to create new expressions, and a fantastic ability also to assimilate some loan words from German, for example, that Germans use it to say in English, thinking that they were speaking English. And the same happened with the French. So it was a great experience. Then I came back to Brazil and I started a long journey as a language teacher. I taught in so many different contexts in language schools. I was also a director, a pedagogical director of a school. I owned a language school. And I was really sure that I was a great English speaker. And I was really sure that I could communicate to anyone, anywhere. And I was able to say that a part of being a speaker of the language, I was also a citizen of the language. And then I started to teach in university in courses of health, engineering, and computer computer sciences, and I knew that I didn't actually know anything about the language because there are so many technical words that are not part of their life, are not part of daily life, and that we cannot get in touch easily. But these words are very meaningful for professionals. And well, then I started a long journey studying the language again, but focusing on professional abilities and professional skills. Many years later, I concluded my PhD, and I concluded my PhD thinking about how the languages were important to arrive where I arrived, and thinking on how important English was for me to arrive where I arrived. And to tell the truth, the journey never stopped. When I started to teach in a language course in the university where I work nowadays and where I was approved to be a permanent professor, I had a huge job preparing materials, selecting texts, verifying the combination and the coherence between the class, the subject, the syllables, and the language proficiency that my students had. And I had to find the magic to adapt the language to the context and to my students. So then I started a huge process observing that knowing the language is not enough to teach the language, but teaching the language is surprisingly efficient if I could keep learning the language. And for me it was very great because I could learn many new words to describe the new state and the new city where I was living. And also I had the chance to go deeper in certain contexts of language studying and some contents of the language that before I've never got in touch. For example, I remembered until today that one certain day I had to prepare a class concerned to sexual diseases, and for me it was very hard to find a way to talk to the students about this certain subject. I went through the city and got a lot of information about how the public system of health worked and how they could have access to free SIDA or AIDS tests. And I took all this information to the class. And all of a sudden, a student of mine asked it for me, "Teacher, have you ever tried all these tests?" And I said, "Oh yes, it's very useful." And he said for me, "Well, tomorrow I will try." And I was very, very, very happy with that. But for me, on that class, I was pretty sure that the language was a way of promoting awareness of something that in his modern tongue he was not able to talk about. And so I got to myself new learnings on the process of learning English. And this new learning was for me a great chance to look up that I use this language nowadays to have access to other people and to communicate with other people. So, to tell the truth, we have so many challenges to learn English. But for me, the main challenge is to know that English is a living language, and today it's an international language. And every day you learn a new expression. Every day there is a new word or expression to come. Every day there is someone using English to express personal or even national expressions that doesn't exist in English. And little by little, English is getting full of loan words of other languages. And so this is the mystery, and this is the secret. You can't think that learning English is a formula or a mathematical process. Learning English is a process of creating, a process of getting in a new discourse. And when you assimilate that learning English is not a mathematical formula, you get in touch with a new way to express yourself. And for me, the most difficult, it was to find it. And when I found it, I was able to know that I will never be a perfect English speaker, but I can be the best person to communicate using English where I am and where I will be. So there are so many years that I've been studying the language day by day, more than, well, I'm getting old, but more than 35 years now. And I was in Europe some months ago, and I had the opportunity to visit some universities and to be a visiting professor. And I was really, really, really happy that when I was in international contexts, I could teach, well, so many different contents in linguistics and applied linguistics, and to talk about internationalization, and people could comprehend me. And at the same time I was talking, I also was learning, because in so many different parts of the world, people use different words to refer to the same thing. So that's it. I think that there is no difficulties in learning English, but we may find a way to find awareness that English is just a language, and that as a language we can be part of it. That's it.